be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. As Jesus and the disciples were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men. They will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." They were overwhelmed with grief. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the temple tax approached Peter and said, "Does your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes," Peter said. When he came into the house, before he had time to speak, Jesus asked him, "What is your opinion, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take tolls or census tax? From their subjects or from foreigners?" When he said this, Peter responded, "From foreigners." Jesus said to him, "Then the subjects are exempt. But that we may not offend them, go to the sea, drop in a hook, and take the first fish that comes up. Open its mouth, and you will find a coin worth twice the temple tax. Give it to them for me and for you." The Gospel of the Lord. Today we recognize St. Jane Frances de Chantal, who died in 1641. She was the wife of Baron de Chantal and bore 6 children, 2 of whom died at birth. In some short order, I don't recall how, the Baron himself died, and she became a religious sister, a nun, and formed or founded with St. Francis de Sales the Visitation Nuns. And in the course of 20-some years, she started no less than 83 or 4 monasteries for the nuns. It's a non-obligatory feast, but really worthy of mention, not only because of her hard work and the suffering she went through, but her openness to the rhythm and movements of her vocation. It would appear that her call and vocation was that of marriage and motherhood. She was a very good mother and yet bore at the same time the loss of 2 of her 6 children. And yet, after having raised her children at the death of her husband, she was called in a new way and served the Lord as a nun and founded again so many homes or houses, monasteries of religious learning and vocation for many others. The theme somewhat fits the readings today. Now, really just on the face of things, if you read the reading from Ezekiel a couple times, what's the vision sound like? A thunderstorm? Really? It is? I think it's Psalm 119 that really describes literally a thunderstorm, and the psalmist is praising God for the power and the light and the fear, awe, or reverence of the lightning. Now, this, I think, is also a similar movement, different but similar, of Jane Frances. Ezekiel has already been, or is still, a temple priest. But he's writing here in the 5th year of the 4th month of King Jehoiakim, while they're in exile, which means they're not in Israel. So he has this vision. Now, visions may seem a little odd to us because they don't seem very common. I think they're a lot more common than we know. There's mystics all over the world and people who are living on a very high, how do you say it really, kind of a high expression of Christianity, but you know it never hits the papers. But still, a huge cloud flashing fire, sounds like lightning, right? In brightness. And in the midst of that fire, it seemed like it gleamed something like electrum, Still sounds like lightning. And then he sees these figures. It's really an image of Ezekiel seeing the glory of God. Now, what's pertinent about that? It's important because they're not in Israel. And the people are completely depressed and feeling very punished and rejected by God because they deeply believed that God was only the God of Israel. And God could not or would not reveal the divine self outside of Israel. It's a big change in the perception and understanding of the people of Israel that God is the God of all the world, all the people. So that God can reveal the divine self, reveal God himself, in this case to Ezekiel, because now it really is a new call in this time of exile, that Ezekiel will now be the prophet of the Lord, not just a priest, an exerciser of religious ritual, but now a prophet of God who will stir a new faith in the people and give them hope. First, did Jane Frances choose, or was her marriage a prearranged one? I'm going to presume they chose each other. I think that's the case. She bore 6 children and was a loving mother. But her heart had a zeal for the Lord in charity and compassion and service. So after the death of her husband, she was called to a new vocation. The gospel has 2 parts. The first paragraph, you would say, is probably the more important part. Jesus is revealing the paschal mystery through death to new life. It's the meaning and the function, the movement of how we are saved in the dying and the rising of Jesus. This is getting late in Matthew's gospel. It's chapter 17. And this is probably the second, if not the third time, Jesus has revealed his passion and death. They were overwhelmed with grief. Intermission. And now, maybe the next day, why these 2 readings are put together, we have this reasonably cute little story about getting money out of a fish. I wonder if Peter realized, maybe I shouldn't talk for him before I talk about it to him. Peter presumes to automatically say, does your teacher pay the temple tax? Oh, yes, he's a good boy. He always does what's right. Well, Jesus did. I'm sure he paid the tax many times in his many travels. Once he became of age, that as an adult male, a Jewish male, he had to pay the tax for the upkeep of the temple. Kind of like bringing your church envelope. Maybe we should make that a law. But still, Peter speaks for him. And without being impatient or corrective, Jesus uses it as a teaching moment. What's your opinion, Simon? Who pays tax? Subjects or foreigners? Well, mostly the foreigners do, but in this case, well, we all have to share the load and help pay for the upkeep of the church, and in this case, the temple. But Jesus stretches the understanding that there will one day be a new temple, and that he, the Greek changes, if we knew more deeply the meaning, that you're paying taxes to the king. Who's the king? Ultimately, it's Jesus, to whom we pay no tax. He is the king of all, and he receives all without cost or merit. We cannot pay Jesus. We cannot pay God back for all that God has done for us. We do not have to pay a debt or a tax or a fee for the sustenance and the maintenance of our salvation. It is God's gift. And again, the Greek implies that not only is Peter adopted into the life of the kingdom, but Jesus himself puts himself on that same level. It's an interesting turn of words, is it not? God is the God of all people. Where are you at this stage and place in your life, where may God be calling you to a new perception, a new awareness of perhaps doing something new for the Lord? I know it sounds like work, but maybe as we move toward not only our senior years, but our eldering years, maybe it's more of an interior quietude to which God is calling us, so that we find our true peace in Christ, so that as we find that deeper truth in eldering in the length of our years, we can bring the light of that wisdom to many others. That is, in fact, could be a rather fruitful vocation. Let's not put God in a box or keep him there if we think we have him there. Let God be God over all people. For all that's going on in the world, Jesus is still the Son of Man. From the first reading, we honor the glory of God. From the gospel, we give thanks and praise to God for the gift of our salvation in the person of Christ. May God be praised, and may we do so by how we live today.